The South African Union of Students is threatening to shut down the country. That's if Higher Education Minister Nzimande, I beg your pardon, does not respond to their demands. It's given, that's the union, the minister it had given the minister until Friday to answer to its 15 demands. Students protested around the country this week over funding issues. Thabo Shingange is with the Union of Students joining us now after a meeting that you had today, Thabo, with some of the other student leadership. Are you all in one accord? Have you all agreed to go ahead with the national shutdown on Monday?
Firstly, good evening, Tembegile, and to the viewers. Thank you very much for affording us this particular platform. I think the meeting actually is still ongoing. I stepped outside so I could be able to give an update in terms of the engagements. SRCs are currently engaged. The Deputy Minister is here to engage directly with SRCs as well on some of their issues. However, there seems to be, a lot of backlogs and a lot of, rhetoric that is being thrown around. I mean, student leaders have been here since 10 a.m. They are still at loggerheads with the department on the various demands. And we have made it clear, in fact, that should the Deputy Minister leave this particular meeting without responding positively to these particular demands, on Monday we are initiating a shutdown of all 26 universities, inclusive of the TVET sector at large. We are doing this because ours is simply a call for free education. We are tired of talking. They know our demands. The ministry has our demands. They know them right in front of their table. And so at this particular point, we are asking, we are demanding rather for implementation. Because it cannot be that when we are promised free education and we come and we want to engage our university vice chancellors, we are met with police brutality, we are met with brutality from private security. Meanwhile, all we are asking for is free education. So if this meeting does not resolve positively on these particular demands, we are as a union continuing ahead as we have declared from Monday with the national shutdown.
You say you're speaking directly to the Deputy Minister for Higher Education, that's Buti Manamela, right? So just this week, the Minister, Nzimande, said that funding would be reprioritized for NSFAS. This would take care mainly of the first-year cohort, as I understand it, of students. You've got an extra 7 billion rand that's now been added to the budget as a result of these protests this week. Is the Deputy Minister making any promises beyond those commitments?
No, actually, I think we are locked into those particular commitments, which as the student union and the SRCs are making it clear that our demands are 15 demands in total, and particularly because the ministry often ducks and dive around this NSFAS issue. They do not have an obligation to NSFAS students only. The Department of Higher Education and Training has an obligation to all students in the higher education sector. This is including the missing middle who are not covered by your NSFAS system, who are drowning in historical debts across our universities. This includes postgraduate students whom you fund from undergraduate as NSFAS students. So you consider them to be poor from their first year to their final year undergraduate. The time when they have to do their honors, which is what the job market requires, you no longer fund these postgraduate students because NSFAS doesn't fund postgraduate students. So our demands are cut across the entire sector of the higher education sector, and they speak to the experiences of students, not just of NSFAS students, of students in the sector around the failure of the government to implement on its particular promises. The fact that historical debt of students sits at 10 billion rand, and we have a government that is able to bail out things like SAA but cannot bail out students on their historical debt. What does it mean? In fact, maybe we must break it down. What does it mean to bail out students or clear the historical debt of students? As it stands, a number of students cannot get employment. A number of students cannot find meaningful employment because their qualifications are being withheld by the university vice chancellor because they owe these particular universities money. However, should the government for once consider to bail out students, it would mean that every single student in the sector will have their qualification with them, will have their academic record with them, will be able to find meaningful employment. So why is it that when we come and want to demand these particular things, something they've already agreed to in principle, the government says, yes, no university must withhold your academic records. Meanwhile, on the ground, universities are withholding the academic records of students. So we're saying that the government has an obligation to respond to all of these particular demands that speak to the higher education and not just NSFAS alone.
And where is the middle ground for you, Thabo? I mean, you've got a list of 15 demands, top of which being the issue of funding and the payment of the historical debt, right? Minister Nzimande says, yes, budgets have been cut across the board as a result of COVID-19. There are also issues around the poor economy, also linked to a degree to the pandemic itself, but even before COVID, South Africa's economy was struggling. So what are you willing to compromise on at this stage?
I think at this stage, these 15 demands are the compromise, to be honest, Tembegile. I think we've compromised too much as the youth of this particular country. In fact, the government from 1994 has promised free education. We went to the streets in 2015. They promised, the former president, President Jacob Zuma, declared free education on live television and said would be implemented as of 2018. Instead, what we're seeing in 2021, nearly 4 years later, is a reversal of those particular promises. So we're not willing to compromise because these are the challenges that students are facing. We're not willing to compromise on any of these these particular demands because they speak to the realities, they speak to the issues that are affecting the students. Otherwise, then it means that what we are doing is just merely for show, and it's not what we're doing. What we're doing is that we're articulating the realities across the higher education sector at large, and we're not willing to engage, to compromise at this point, and not at no particular point. The compromise has been what we've been considering all along. These particular years for the last 4 years, we're no longer willing to compromise on the failures to deliver on the promise of free education.
You say the government has, of course, made the promise of free education from as far back as the 90s, right? But this week we saw the Secretary General of the party that's been in government since 1994, Ace Magashule, march alongside students to make this demand. Did that make sense for you to have such a high leader of the party that's failed to deliver on this promise march among students?
Look, I mean, we have engaged extensively on this point as the union together with SRCs, and our role is clear, especially to the governing party, the ANC. To see the SG, march with students on the ground is all good and well, but it's also kind of ironic because we're appealing to them, the government, and him as a custodian of the organization to implement on its own policies of free education. So we find it that, it cannot be that the government, which has power to declare and to pronounce on these particular issues, is the same government which is on the ground with students speaking as if we are speaking the same voice. We're saying that we want him to implement. Yes, he's repeating our issues. He understands them very well to a point where he can come to the ground and engage with student issues with confidence. So we're saying we're tired of engaging. He's the custodian of the ANC, which is the governing party of this country. And it's high time that the governing party and the state at large implement on its own policies at large and not come to the ground to talk. They must come to the ground to tell us, if they want to talk, they must come to the ground to tell us how is free education going to be rolled out, when is free education going to be rolled out, and how the mechanics of it, not to come and sympathize or to come and speak rhetoric with us as students.
So the irony then certainly not lost. Thabo Shingange from the South African Union of Students speaking tonight to us here on ENCA as those talks continue between the various student leaders in the country ahead of a planned national shutdown on Monday.